Today in the wood shop, I'm going to see if I can make some stuff I could sell out of this. Found wood, scraps, leftovers. Let's go. I guess we'll start with this, which is a pretty gnarly looking piece of stump from a cedar tree. First thing I had to do was figure out how I was going to trim off some of the protruding parts on this hunk of stump. Wouldn't be a problem really for a decent sized bandsaw. This little thing only has a 6 or 7 inch throat though, so I'm not sure at first how to go about it. Finally get it started though, and make a few cuts nibbling off some here and there. This thing is so oddly shaped, there's no good way to do this. I end up cutting a few bits off just to make room to clear the upper guide so I can get it through to cut off what I want to cut off. I really should have just used a handsaw. After that, I take it over to the joiner to flatten the bottom, and it barely fits through there. I think I need bigger equipment. Oh, geez, there's a joke there. But anyway, after several passes, I get it pretty decently flattened. I'm going to see if I can get off some of this loose stuff, the loose bark and pieces, to clean this up, but still keep the live edge look or the live surface look on that. This is a necessary step because the outer sapwood on this cedar will decay after a few years outside. It's not as weather resistant as the heartwood, so some of it is a little bit rotted and I want to get rid of anything soft or crumbly. I stab and scrape away at it, doing my best impression of a hungry woodpecker, and it does take a while. But eventually I get most of the soft or loose stuff knocked off. But then it's pretty rough in spots. So I go at it with a wire wheel to clean up the loose stuff that's left and smooth it out a little at the same time. This thing can get into the grooves and cavities of this thing pretty well. I started with it fastened down in the workmate, but decided I can move it around better on the bench, holding it with one hand and the drill in the other. Since I'm one-handing the drill though, I put on a leather welding glove to protect my holding hand. Good thing too. With time I got this thing pretty well cleaned up though. It's found wood, so it didn't cost anything, but I pay for it with the added time I need to put into it to actually make something desirable out of it. Then I start contouring the top of it, but after I got going and was looking at it, I decided that the top was slanted the wrong way. So I stopped and took it over to the bandsaw to see if I could make a cut to take care of that. I actually made several cuts, but finally got it to a point where I was satisfied with it. Then it was back to the wood eater to kind of round over the edges a little, and touch up a few other spots as well. Trying to blend everything together to make it look kind of, I don't know, organic, natural, something like that. And I went at it with the random orbit sander to smooth out the bandsaw and wood eater marks. I think I was using 80 or 100 right here to start with. But as you can see, it's working pretty well. I'm not trying to finish this piece yet, but I've got a pretty good start on it. I had that one kind of in the shape that I wanted it and the preliminary sanding on it done, so I decided to start on the other pieces to see what I can do with those. First I had this cedar round that I was going to cut a chunk out of, and I'm cutting it kind of in half, but I'm just using the better shaped piece so I'll get one usable out of this. Next is a piece that's a section of a small log, also cedar. Basically, this is a piece you'd find in a firewood pile, if that gives you any ideas. I started out by cutting off the branches that are sticking out. Then I cut it in half right down the middle. Well, I started cutting it in half, then found out it won't fit through the saw. This little bandsaw just isn't cutting the mustard. No, it won't fit through that way either, dummy. So I had to resort to the most hated tool that I can't do without, the Sawzall. This tool has got to be the most inaccurate, sloppy tool ever invented, but in so many instances, it's the tool that gets the job done. It jumps around and vibrates so much it feels like you're riding a bucking bronco when you're using it. Here, even though I had it clamped in pretty tight, it vibrated the piece loose in the workmate. But after a little reset, I made it. Oops. Yippee-ki-yay, cowboy. But no harm done. So now it's in two pieces, and I'll use both of these for what I'm doing. Back to being a woodpecker. Again, this wood is free, but I gotta work for it to make it have any value. Kinda like life. This one needed quite a bit of work, but I think it's gonna look cool. A little quick cleanup needed. I also made some passes with these pieces through the joiner to flatten out the bandsaw and bucking bronco cut. That thing does a sweet job. Then it's more time with the Destructo wheel to round over those branches. And the sander as well. And I spent more time with the wire wheel until my arms got good and wore out. Then I blew it out with a little compressed air and did a little more woodpeckering. These do take a little work, that's for sure. Well, a little more loose stuff. That'll do. On the other half of that log, after I take a little pause to get my dust mask back on and open another window, I'm going to go a little farther and take most of the sapwood off and get down to the heartwood. That'll give this one a little bit more of a refined look, different from the others. I'm still trying to keep the general shape and some of the features of it though. I'm also leaving little strips of sapwood in spots to give it a multicolored look for some contrast and visual interest. This sapwood is pretty soft and this thing turns it into sawdust pretty easily, so I have to be careful not to go too far. It does make for quite a dramatic transformation though, and makes a pretty nasty looking piece of log look pretty nice. I'll go at this with a sander later also to refine it even more. Then for the half round, I'm going to shape this on the belt sander and I'm going to take off all the weathered wood on the outside to get down to the clean sapwood and shape that into what I want for its general shape. On this one, the only heartwood that'll be showing is on the sides. I could have taken this down part way with the grinder and carving disc, but I figured this would afford me a little more control, so I didn't go too far. If I took off a little too much with the wood eater, it would still need sanding, which would mean I'd have to take off even more. So this way was a little slower, but it was harder to take too much. Plus I wanted to keep it even across the width of the piece and not drastically round over the edges. So this method was good for that. And since I mentioned sanding, that's what I did next on these pieces. At least the preliminary coarser grit sanding. Getting started on the other pieces, I used an auxiliary fence to get a high angle to cut a couple wedges out of this old board that I think came from a pallet. I'm not even sure. But it was decent looking wood, so I figured I'd use it. I cut out a few of them, hoping I could use one or two and hide the nail holes that were in them. Then lopped them off into a wedge. Then this piece was left over from the book tree build, and a good portion of this board is rotted and soft, so I'm ripping off a piece that is still good. Then I ripped a bit off the other edge to make it nice and square and parallel to the first cut. And I ended up with a piece 3 1/8 inches wide or so, and it's about 1 3/8 inches thick. I had some leftover 1x scraps from that build also, so I'm ripping those into 1 3/4 wide pieces, so I have enough for 4 pieces, which will be the legs. Then I cut the main block 10 inches long. So for this one, I'm going to use this block of wood here, but I'm going to put legs on it. So I'm going to take these thinner pieces, and those are about 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to make 4 legs and hold it up about 3/4 of an inch. And what I'm going to do, instead of just attaching them on the outside, I'm going to cut dados in here about half the thickness of that, so they'll set over the piece. And I've got this scrap piece here that I already used to set the depth and set the depth stop on my miter saw, and I'm just going to use the miter saw to make these dados. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to start out with my piece flush with the end of this block, and that'll set my distance that I want it to raise it up. Or this will be the bottom, so I'll come up 3/4 of an inch, make my first cut, and then as I move it across, I can cut the dado. And after I get the dados cut, then I'll cut the leg off. This way I've got a longer piece to work with, so I'm not trying to hold a little short piece in there. So I'll cut all the dados, and then we'll cut them off for length for each leg. This backer board I have clamped in here is acting as an auxiliary fence and is necessary to get the workpiece out far enough away from the regular fence so the blade can make the cut all the way across the workpiece. But it's also serving as a registration block to locate the piece for the first cut. I use the block as the measurement and mark it so I know how wide to make the dado. This method is repetitive and a little tedious, but it lets you cut a few dados easily without much setup or blade changing. I stop a little short of my mark to check the fit and then sneak up on it. And I do that for all 4 legs. After I get the dados all cut, I take the same scrap block and move it to the other side and set it up as a stop block to cut all the legs to the same length. And if I had one complaint about this saw, this would be it. This has got to be the chintziest hold-down clamp ever designed. Come on, DeWalt. You could have done way better than this. Anyway, once I get it set up, I cut all the legs, making sure I let the saw come to a stop before I lift it up, which you should always do when you're using a stop block like this, as the piece is trapped in there, and if you raise the blade while it's still spinning, the curves could raise the edge of the piece and send it flying. And you can see it do that on the last cut here. If it did that with the blade spinning, it would not be good. Next up is this old weathered 2x4, and I'm going to cut that into 5 pieces the shape to make a star. And I've got a video explaining the angles and measurements to make these. I'll leave a link in the description so you can watch that one if you haven't yet. I make sure I cut the first one long enough, then use it to measure to cut the rest. Then using the leftover piece as a stop block, I make the other 2 cuts to complete each piece until I have all 5. I then took those over to the router table and put a chamfer on all the top and bottom edges. Not a very deep chamfer, just enough to give them some definition. And you really wouldn't need to do the bottom edges, but it's an easy way to clean them up and make them look nice. So I do those too. Okay, so if I haven't mentioned it yet, these are all tea candle or tea light holders. And I'm going to figure out where I want them on here just by kind of doing them by eye and figuring out where I want to drill the holes to put those in there. And this one, it's pretty much going to be evenly spaced out, so I can just measure for that. Same way with this one. It's a square block, so I can just figure out by measurement where I want to put those. This one, and let's try this one. I think, not sure which one I want to be the front there. Maybe that side. So I was going to try and get 3. I mean, 2 would be easy. I could space them like that. But I could hold them over a little bit like that. And maybe get another one about there. So I might do that. This one's going to be interesting trying to drill this one, because what I want to do is get one there, of course, and then 2 more kind of in these slanted portions. So I'll figure that out. These, and this one, I'll show you this one. Not sure. I was going to put one big one, but I think I can actually get 3 candles in this also. So that's probably the way I'll go there. These, of course, will be evenly spaced. This I know isn't going to turn out quite like I planned because it's not wide enough. So I don't know if I'm going to use these or not. This should be a little bit wider to take these, because these are a good 1.5 inches, and this isn't much thicker than that. For these, what I did was I went corner to corner this way and made a mark, and then corner to corner that way and made a mark. And I wasn't happy with exactly where that was going to land, so I moved it 1/4 inch in that direction toward the point on this line that I marked, and that's where I'm going to drill those. And I cut myself a template so I can just lay it on there on the drill press and locate where I want to do that. So it's on to the drill press. I basically just used the template to locate the piece, and then brought the bit down and made an indentation in the wood to mark it with the point. Then I removed the template to do the drilling. And I didn't set the depth stop or anything. I'm just kind of going by eye after figuring out I need to go a little deeper than the thickness of the bit. I had the shop vac hose clamped there for a little dust collection, but it didn't really catch much while I was drilling. It really needs to be closer to do much. I did the wedge ones next and used clamps on those because the edge of the bit was going to hit before the center point, which is kind of unstable. Clamps worked okay, but not great because of the slant of the piece. I just had to go very slow when the bit first was starting into the piece to prevent it from grabbing. Doing the first two holes on this piece was a bit of a rodeo. I managed to get them done and didn't get that part on video, but I'll show you the aftermath after I drill the easy one. So this one proved to be a bit problematic in the drill press. This shape, very hard to hold or clamp down. And when I was drilling this one, I ended up with a bit of damage here. And the reason for that is the bit was hitting over here first, and it kept wanting to pull this sideways. And so it was very hard to hold. So I ended up with damage there. I'll have to sand out, and damage over here I'll have to sand out, even though this is the back side. I'll still get rid of that and blend that in. And so this one was a bit sketchy to do in the drill press. This side I went real slow and clamped it better and had a little better luck. So if you do one like this, be careful on the drill press. And of course this one was super easy. I just spaced them out and marked them by measurement, then drilled them all out in no time. Then on this one, no big problems other than the fact that I'm drilling into knots basically, so very hard to drill. You can even hear it laboring as it's trying to eat its way into it. Caused extra vibration and I had to go slow and it needed some extra downforce. It's pretty hard on the bit. On this second one, it even stalled out the drill press. But after a restart, I went even slower and got it done. The third one was easier as it was into the softer sapwood for the most part. Test fit? Okay. This one was easy and I drilled all three in it with no issues. Then came the stump. Probably my favorite piece out of them all, just because it kind of looks like something you'd see in a Harry Potter movie. But drilling it was a little bit like drilling concrete. I had no idea this cedar could be this hard to drill, but it was. This part of the tree is very dense and I'm drilling into the end grain of it, no less. And as you can see, the bit is getting hot. And this little drill press is laboring a little. I ended up having to go very slow and clamping it as best I could to try to hold it. When I was doing the second one, I could tell the bit was getting hot and I pretty much smoked it on that hole. I was hoping I could get the third one done before it went totally dull, because that would be the very last one to do and I didn't have another bit that size. So, now for the last one. After I finally figured out how I could get it in there, and there was really only one way, I had a little trouble clamping it effectively. Everything is a curve, so it's hard to get the clamps to grab it properly. I got a couple clamps on it finally, but they weren't all that effective. Piece moved as I was starting. I was going to move it back, but it had already gouged into it enough. I figured I'd just go with it. I applied a little extra squeeze pressure on the main clamp with one hand while running the drill press with the other, and managed to squeak one last hole out of it. You can see, though, that it was quite the smoke show, and it was putting out more sawdust rather than the bigger chips that a sharp bit would. That evening I went online and ordered a new set of higher quality bits. Quick test. Maybe a bit deeper. After the higher stress of drilling those holes, hoping I didn't damage anything to the point of ruin, I welcomed a little relaxing sanding. Hand sanding and machine sanding to take all the sharp edges down on the edges of the holes and kind of blend them into the organic shapes on those pieces. So this is the only one that we actually have to assemble. And what I'm going to do, I got a little gauge block here that's about 9/16 of an inch thick, and I'm going to use that for my setback for the legs off the ends. I'm just going to clamp this on here. Then I can put my legs right up against it to glue those on. Just like that. And then I got the bottoms marked, so I can just run them up against it with a little glue and then clamp that on there, and that's how I'm going to install those. I'm just using glue and clamps to hold these. The glue should be enough without any fasteners since there's no real stress on these sideways. And I didn't want any unneeded holes anywhere. And we'll let that dry. So I got these all sanded up and ready for finish. For the cedar ones, I think I'm going to use water-based polyurethane because it discolors the sapwood less than anything else I've tried. For this one, I'll probably do tung oil and then maybe hard wax oil on top. For these, not sure what wood this is. It kind of looks like walnut, but it was reclaimed wood, so I don't know. I'll probably use tung oil and then hard wax oil on those also. For these, I was going to use an oil-based polyurethane, but I opened up the can and it had gone bad. So I can't use that. So I'll probably just use hard wax oil on these. This water-based poly lasts a long time in the can, so I can keep this on hand all the time. Goes on easy with a brush. You do get some surface bubbles with it, but they usually go away on their own. But a gentle blast of compressed air blows them out of all the nooks and crannies here. It brings out the grain fairly well in the heartwood without making the sapwood blotchy on this cedar. Another nice thing about it is that it dries fairly quickly, and you can give it a light sanding and put on a second coat within a few hours. I really like the tung oil on the spalted wood though. and it doesn't get any easier to apply. Just brush or rub it on and let the wood absorb it. It dries slowly, so you can leave it for hours or even overnight and still rag off any excess you might have. It will eventually dry all the way and polymerize some, meaning it will get somewhat hard. I'm using it on this unknown wood also, which I thought was walnut, but after putting the tung oil on, I don't think so. And just my homemade hard wax oil on these star pieces, which are just made from an old 2x4. I'm just rubbing it on with a small piece of t-shirt. You've probably noticed that my normal everyday garb is a t-shirt. Well, when I wear one out, I cut it up and it lives another life as shop rags. So I was probably wearing this applicator a couple weeks ago. Anyway, this is a mix of mineral oil and beeswax in paste form. Pretty good stuff, all natural, food safe even, so I can use it on my cutting boards and wooden kitchen utensils too, which you can also use the tung oil on, by the way. So let me just say a few words and give you a few tips on these. These ones that are natural wood, well, it's basically free wood. It's found wood out in the woods. You put a lot more effort into getting them cleaned up and shaped and sanded and making them into something. So you invest a lot more time than you would if you're using dimensional lumber. As far as drilling these out, this one wasn't bad because it's a fairly even surface, and I could get the drill bit started with the point first. These other ones, where it's more of a contour, the edge of the bit, when it was in the drill press, the edge of the bit was hitting first, which tended to want to move the piece around and make it unstable. So you really need to clamp it down, or I thought afterwards, might have been better if I'd have used a hand drill on these so I could start the drill point first, angled at the contour I'm drilling, then once it was established and cutting all the way around, then move the hand drill straight to make the hole straight. If I did these again, I'd try that method. I think it might work a little better than actually doing them in the drill press. If you've got a flat surface like this one, the drill press is the way to go, or like drilling these. These dimensional lumber ones, they're a lot easier to do. You put less time into doing those than with the natural wood ones. So that's something to keep in mind. Depending on what tools you have, you can do a variety of different types of these tea light holders. On these ones, they're a little bit different size, and I also, with this one, I chamfered all the edges with a pretty decent sized chamfer and made it angled on each end. So this one has more like facets. This one I did roundovers on all sides, left this at 90 degrees, and this comes more to a point. So a little bit different design on those two. I kind of like this one with the faceted edges. But those came out pretty nice, except for the fact that on this side, it cut into the edge more because this piece needs to be a little bit wider for an 1.5 inch bit. It should be like a minimum of 2 inches, and these are more like 1 3/4. So I would probably glue 2 pieces of dimensional lumber together to make these if I was going to do it again, but this is what I had, so this is what I did. This is what I used. Same way with this one. The one edge was a little bit tight. I had a little more meat on the other edge, but I think they turned out okay, especially since you'll be displaying these or viewing them from one angle usually. Other than that, I'll give you some shots of them in action, and I'll show you something neat on these ones, the ones that I made out of the star pieces. So one thing I'll show you about these, the star ones, you can display them in the original star configuration like this on a table or whatever, or you can change it up a bit. And display them like this, which I think is pretty cool. Oh, and since I'm wearing the shirt, what's the difference between a small candle and a skinny medieval horseman? One's a nightlight and the other's a light night. See you next time.